Yo. What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Mars here, back again with another YouTube video. And before you say it, yes, I know, it's been forever. Listen, life has been a bit of a whirlwind these past few months. The good kind though, you know? I've been working a lot, freelancing a lot more, which is such a blessing. Been on a trip here and there, just moving and shaking for real. Not a lot of people here yet, but I'll still apologize to the few that are here. My bad. I'll try not to have such a long break between this video and my next one. I make no promises, but I'm gonna try my best. That being said, I appreciate you if you are watching, taking the time out to spend some time with me in this moment. Not here to do a life update. I'm here to talk about a very significant movie that has impacted the cinema world this year and was a topic of many a conversation for a good month after its release. And now that it's on streaming, I think it's a good time to revisit it with a little bit more depth. Before that, you already know the drill. Like this video if you like this video, and drop your comments below. Thoughts, concerns, questions, anything. I want to hear from you. And subscribe to the channel, especially if you get to the end of this long video, and especially if you love it. Let me know, and so I can make more content just like this for you all out there. And make sure you follow me and all that kind of jazz at all these places over here, all these socials and whatnot. But yeah, thank you again, and anyways. All right, so if you haven't caught on yet, well, why would you? I guess there's a lot of good movies that came out this year, but the movie I'm speaking of is Dune 2. So it's on HBO Max now to stream. I think most people saw it in theaters because of how huge it was, but I definitely feel like it's a movie that deserves a rewatch, a second watch, a third watch, a fourth watch even, because there's so much packed in there that makes for interesting dialogue. In this video, I really want to talk about perception, perspective, and expectations. I have a question for you all later to weigh in on, so please stick around for that because I think it could be really interesting and important. But anyways, in a lot of ways, I think Dune takes these aspects and gets really crafty with how we as an audience are meant to understand them. Over the course of the past few months, I've seen Paul Atreides heralded as a hero, people proud of his story arc, the power he gets in getting revenge on those who wronged him and his family. And on the flip side, people kind of comparing him to like a Anakin Skywalker with his fall from grace, or a Eren Yeager and his shift to be the villain in his story. And more on Eren a little later maybe, because I think there's a touch of similarity there. But really, this is bigger than the story of one person, bigger than Paul the individual and his choices. As we learn through the film, he's merely a piece of the puzzle. Really, it's a harrowing warning about the dangers of people, the masses, blindly following already like blind leaders. So let's dig in a little bit. Dune is so much more than your typical sci-fi action movie where there's very finely drawn lines between good and evil. If you don't know, which I'm sure at least some of you do, the movies are based on a series of books that began in the mid-1960s from a man named Frank Herbert, and they were continued and added on to by his son, Brian Herbert. Meat and potatoes, all right? What is Dune about? In a word, to me at least, it's manipulation. In an extreme sense, the perversion of our beliefs, and we're all made victims of it. Characters in the movie, the audience, all of us. And it's shown to us very blatantly, really, like right in our face. Let me explain. So, massive spoilers from this point on, coming along with this explanation. It's the only way to do it, so be warned. All right, so let's start with perspective, mainly because the film itself does, and it's super important as a lens on what's going on as the film progresses. What I think is interesting is how in both Dune 2 and Dune 1, we don't start with Paul at all. Dune 1 begins with Chani explaining the way of life on Arrakis, setting the stage for us as an audience to know the sides and all that. In Dune 2, we hear from Florence Pugh's Irulan character, giving a sort of synopsis of current events. I think a key difference with Dune 2 is how we get a point of view grounded in where the story is currently, and a point of view on Paul and his story despite it not being told by him. I think immediately what this expresses is how we're meant to frame him in the mind of others, as opposed to just framing him as himself. And we as an audience look at him not always directly, but through the eyes of those around him. We see Irulan maybe 4 other times the entire movie. She's super important and significant for a number of reasons, but I think starting the film in this way tells us as viewers to pay attention to the different perspectives, because in a way, they're vastly more impactful to the narrative than the actions themselves. And in that, how are other characters viewing the story as it plays out? The most consistent to me is Stilgar. And have you ever heard of a character that was such a fanboy as hard as Stilgar is for Paul? From the onset of the film, he is like Paul's #1 fan, like literally. And this feels very different from the last film, so it's like a complete stark contrast and switch that I think is really interesting. And side note, it's crazy to kind of see Javier Bardem in this light parallel to the role that sticks out in my mind and probably most of people's minds the most for him, which is Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. It's like really weird, and there's never been a farther departure from a character like in life. But anyways, I love how he's so over the top into Paul that most of the stuff he says and does is like comedic relief. That it almost kind of manipulates you into forgetting how important his viewpoint and his influence is. A lot of things happen in this film as a result of his perspective. Early on in the film, he has a conversation with Jessica, Lady Jessica, Paul's mother, about Paul, and explains to her that the masses need to believe that Paul is the Messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib. In this, he essentially tells Jessica, hey, you have to become the Reverend Mother, because that is what the prophecy for Paul being the Messiah says will happen. And at this point, Jessica is hesitant, but Stilgar all but tells her she's useless otherwise. And this to me is so key as a catalyst for where the film takes us. Throughout the movie, he is constantly and consistently saying how Paul is the Messiah for how he walks, how he talks, every little thing he does really. And it's all proof of the prophecy that Stilgar already believes without actually needing the proof. He just continues to profess it as part of building that narrative for others. And as we see the shift in the tide of the masses and what they believe in, we can look back at all the different moments that built up to it, and in a lot of ways connect Stilgar to a bunch of different ones. His viewpoint is the constant in the film, but to me, there's a lot to be revealed in the change of perspectives as well for Chani viewing Paul. As Paul and Chani begin to become close to each other, we see the scenes with them begin to close the distance between them, like physically on screen. When Paul is first with the Fremen, we see him stand away from Chani as he questions her on what she believes in. And as he integrates with them and as their feelings for each other develop, their scenes get much more intimate. This is also indicated in a shift across the board as we see Paul in these very intimate close-ups, these tight shots where he is engrossed with the people around him and he's on their level and in their spaces. When he says he doesn't want to be leader a little bit before midway through the film, he comes down from the rocks to come to the level of the Fremen, joining their ranks, and that is his message as well. Before the war begins in the final act, we spend a lot of time with these close-ups and with these nicely grouped shots. However, after Paul comes back to life and begins to lead the war, the perspectives change. The space begins to spread, notably between him and Chani. When he first walks into the temple for his speech, we see her viewpoint from like a ways away from him. And the same thing in the final scene after the fight with Fade, where everyone is kneeling except Chani, Paul, of course, and Irulan. This is after Paul has decided to marry Irulan and take her hand, and we see them, Irulan and Paul, in focus far away from the camera, and Chani out of focus in the foreground. This to me is symbolic of Paul's path going away from those he loves. In fact, a number of other shots support this perspective change as well. Think about how often Paul is kind of cut off by himself on screen, and there are a number of stills where it's just him in a lot of like empty space. Of course, the world of Dune lends itself to this just in general. It's a huge desert, but we definitely see a lot more camaraderie and scenes of Paul with others pre-war. Interestingly enough, we don't see many POVs of Jessica looking at Paul, especially when she became Reverend Mother. This may be a stretch, I ain't gonna lie, but to me, given everything else, it felt like in a way that she didn't really see Paul himself at all and could only see what was to come. I can only recall a moment towards the end where it looks as if Fade may kill Paul, that she looks at him again and there's actually kind of something behind her eyes for once. And with that, let's switch gears and flow into the perception aspect of the film. It's not much different, but it's less about looks and how people see Paul and more about actions and reactions. Parallels throughout this film and the last film happen a lot, but one to me sticks out as being an important through line from the way this film begins and the way it ends. The very first scene, we see the Harkonnens, or maybe it's a Sardaukar, I don't know, burning piles of dead bodies. Moments later, after we see the Fremen and Paul defeat the Harkonnens that were after them, they drain the water from their bodies and feed them to the desert. At the start of this movie, there's a lot of emphasis on the appreciation of water, draining bodies, giving them back to the desert, not crying for the dead and wasting water in your tears.
Uts. Never give your water away, not even for the dead.
This is tradition, this is history, this is identity. It is stressed and addressed over and over again in multiple conversations to begin this movie. Later on in the film, in fact, we're shown more juxtaposition of the Harkonnens to the Fremen when they attack their cave home and destroy the water reserves, and again are burning everything in their path. An interesting aside, how the Harkonnens are presented in this film is so amazing to me from a cinema perspective because there is such attention to detail with them and their world and making it a stark contrast to everything else. Everyone has talked about the black and white Coliseum scene and how magnificent it is, and rightfully so, because it for sure is. But I love how there's no color to their world. It's just flat. And in things being black and white, I think it expresses how their mindset is and expresses their perception of the world. Call back to the statement that opened the movie. That's all that the Harkonnens care about, is that power. This is what makes the visual representation of their world so much more impactful to me, because there's nothing else to it but that linear approach of seeking power overall. Every meaningful interaction they have circles this concept. When Fade is at his ceremony and the Baron kisses him, he pulls him down to kiss him again. So many memes about this, and just Austin Butler in general, even though he did fantastic. But I think this is just another form of kind of asserting power and dominance for Fade, in that he's visually below the Baron, but pulls him down to his level to kind of portray that he has this semblance of control. And it's much different than earlier when Léa Seydoux' Lady Margot uses her powers to manipulate his mind and his actions. He is in a position of power in her room, and she forcibly gets him to visually like sink down, releasing over all power to her against his will. Even the room itself is meant to add to that. According to the production designer, Patrice Vermette, her room is meant to resemble an egg between the legs of a spider, which is Fade kind of being held in her clutches, so to speak. But getting away from my point, just another interesting dynamic there that I think is super cool. Back to the Fremen and their differences from the Harkonnens. What's really telling, like really telling, is how once the war is going on, the Fremen's ways change completely. In a scene much like the opening one, they burn bodies of the Harkonnens and the Sardaukars that they defeat in the war. After Paul kills the Baron, we see his lifeless body just laying in the desert being feasted upon by ants. And this is an ironic symbol of change and another representation of that shift to me. The Fremen have given up their ways in their following of Paul. Their perception on the water that they held so dear has been completely flipped on its head, and they waste it extensively in these acts of war. Paul said it in the temple after finding out his mother was the Baron's daughter.
So this is how we'll survive. By being Harkonnens.
And in this statement, we see everyone bend to that and follow suit like nothing ever existed before it. And when everything is all said and done, and Paul is faced with deciding to fight the Great Houses, what did the Fremen do? They leave their world that they have been fighting for forever to take up Paul's holy war. It's such a drastic change, but it hits us almost by surprise, which I think is kind of the point of this film and its commentary on religion and influence. Things like that don't happen overnight, but if you're not careful and not paying attention to the subtle changes around you, you'll look up and notice that everything is not what it once was. And that lands perfectly on the last major facet of Dune 2's narrative that I wanted to discuss: expectations. Earlier I mentioned a question I wanted to ask, and here it is. How do you think Paul feels about everything he's doing and all that is happening around him? What do you gather from him as you watch the film? It's not a question that I want to assume the answer of or answer for you. I think it can be hard to tell and just depends on how you look at it. So I want to know what you all think about it. But I will say, I think there's a certain level of expectation that the character had and has, and I'm not sure that the results are aligning with those expectations. And I think that can be said for everyone. Chani has her expectations crushed at the end of the film. When Paul says he'll take Irulan's hand, we only see Paul's face for a split second, really, because there's very little emotion to it for him during that scene. We hold on Chani as she feels all the pain and the emotion of that decision. Her connection to Irulan and the lines drawn with them is fascinating. She narrates the start of Dune 1, Irulan narrates the beginning of Dune 2. It's Chani's face that closes Dune 2 as well. They both have a set of desires and expectations that are kind of lost by the end of the movie. Irulan, who potentially had the ability to attain power herself, falls to being a mere pawn in Paul's conquest. There was an interesting commentary I saw online that noticed how her headwear became more and more confined as the movie drew to its close. A unique symbolism of how she loses more and more of her autonomy. And she and Chani share two sides of a similar coin. And look at the Bene Gesserit. What happens to Paul is an abomination.
Consider what you're about to do, Paul Atreides.
Silence! Abomination.
This moment is foreshadowed too when Jessica becomes Reverend Mother, and upon realizing she is pregnant, the first Reverend Mother exclaims, It's not directly expressed in the film, but it's heavily implied that the prophecy that the Fremen believe in is completely false. And this is true from the books. It's fake. It's propaganda that came for the Bene Gesserit as a means of controlling power. Their main objective in this universe is to craft the narrative from behind the scenes. We see it with their use of Lady Margot to secure the heir to Feyd-Rautha. It's revealed that the plot to kill the Atreides bloodline was in their plans all along with the Emperor. But the thing that disrupts these expectations and these outcomes is Paul. And it's ironic because he is the Messiah according to their prophecy. All those things fall in line. All throughout the film, the Fremen exclaim Lisan al-Gaib and that it is written. And the truth is that it's all a lie. And since the prophecy was never intended to be fully realized, since it was a made-up story, Paul's existence and the course of actions that led to it are extremely peculiar. It was not supposed to happen like that. Yet and still, our expectations are played with. Paul and Lady Jessica have a conversation before she heads south, where Paul chastises her for spreading propaganda about him. She calls it hope. He yells that it's not.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
And it isn't. It's all orchestrated.
Then what hope is there? Hope? We are Bene Gesserit. We don't hope, we plan.
Everything feels so methodical, and nothing is a coincidence. Irulan and her father moved pieces on a chessboard well before we know that he had been the mastermind behind the destruction of Paul's family in the last film. And at the end, when Lady Jessica tells Reverend Mother Mohaim, no idea how to pronounce that, hopefully that was right, but she tells her that she picked the wrong side. And Reverend Mother responds with saying that there are no sides. And we can assume that in the next movie, there will definitely be more cards to play, and Irulan will be at the center of it all.
But there is one way your family can remain in power, and through you, the continuation of our stewardship. One way. Are you prepared?
You've been preparing me my whole life, Reverend Mother.
What did Paul expect? The Baron expected power as he crawled towards the throne in his final moments of life. Grasping for life, he still was hell-bent on getting power. The Emperor expected to keep power, to stay atop of that literal pyramid that he's at when we see him in the movie at the end. But he ends up at the bottom before even having to kiss Paul's ring. The Baron, the Emperor, Feyd, they all to me feel very consistent in their expectations. But Paul, what about him? His ring is really important to me. He takes it off when he becomes one of the Fremen people, when he exclaimed that he's found his way. It was almost to me a turning point on him potentially being able to give up his revenge, give up his fight, and give his life to being with the Fremen and being with Chani. But when Gurney comes back, which in some ways is a remnant of the past, he introduces Paul to the power that he could have with the weaponry of his family. And with this, the ring returns. Paul plays with it in his hand. He plays with that chance, that opportunity of power. And he eventually puts it back on when the war begins, giving into it. And the real foreshadowing for me comes at the end after his fight with Feyd, where we see the ring stained with blood, that power tainted in a way. I can't say that Paul really wanted all this power. Much like Jessica, he changes once he drinks the water of life and is brought back from the dead. We see him sitting alone in a complete silo, and he tells Jessica that he sees a single path to victory. And going on another tangent here, but for me as an avid anime nerd, this felt so reminiscent of Eren Yeager in his final season of Attack on Titan. He saw the future and then was shackled by it, completely unable to make any decisions for himself anymore. And to me, it seems like Paul is the same way. His demeanor is different. It feels like he's just kind of going through the motions almost because he knows what'll happen. Even when he goes into the temple and announces himself as the Messiah, I felt like he was kind of putting on an act, putting on a face, much like Eren did in front of his friends, forcing them to kill him because it was the best course of action according to what he saw. But what happens in Attack on Titan has a more important takeaway, because even though Eren bought some peace and potentially longer lives for his friends, and maybe this was all he cared about in the end, he didn't really fix anything. War and destruction still occurred. It may have been put off, but it still happened. And he caused all of this destruction, destroying the majority of the world, just to not have a positive impact in the long run. He and Paul are both tethered to a future, and it's like, because they know how things will play out, there's nothing that they can do now but go along with the vision. The people following Paul are blinded by belief in their prophecy, in their Messiah, but that Messiah is blinded to everything but what he's seen occur in his own head, in a way losing his own essence to his own prophecy. But you can only see so far, and that's the manipulation. Even though you think you know what's going to happen, even though you feel like you have no other choice but the single path that leads to the world you want in that moment, things are not as they seem. And playing with power that strong can take away your power altogether. There is so much to talk about when it comes to Dune. It's hard to even have this video do it justice, just because the lore goes so deep. I just took one angle of the messaging here, but there are many different viewpoints and many different things to tackle. I had sketched out this entire portion of the video that was dedicated to ecology, the story by Frank Herbert in the books, and how it relates to the movie, and how his actual real life influenced how Dune came out, and a ton of other stuff in the movie and in the books and blah, 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 but I just couldn't make it fit. It was just too much and too deep of another rabbit hole. And not to mention, I probably would have been here for another hour or more in this video and taken another month and a half to make this video. I can revisit it at some time in the future, maybe. If you guys are interested, let me know, because I enjoy all the details here so much. It's super interesting and, just very deep. But for now, I'm just gonna wrap this conversation up. Hopefully you came out with a different understanding of the meaning behind Dune and its central themes, and can view some of the occurrences of the movie in a different light. Give it a rewatch. Maybe you could tell me something that I missed or misinterpreted, which I'm sure I did. But hey, I'm human, we're all human, just having fun out here, But if you made it this far, I just want to thank you and show my deep gratitude for you staying with it. I know it's a long video, I know it's very detailed, I know it's very in-depth and a lot of words and talking and blah, blah, blah. And I so appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to lock in with me right quick. Not right quick for real, but you get what I'm saying. I'm gonna be a bit selfish here, so I apologize, but I gotta ask you for more since we got you here. Please, yet again, comment, thoughts, questions, ideas, all that good stuff. This video took a lot of research, a lot of time to make, and a lot to write this script. Clearly by how long it took for me to get it to you. Getting the footage, getting the stills, doing the edits, it's a bunch of work. And I love it, honestly. I really enjoy diving deep into one single movie to kind of examine it and everything in it. And I love to know that you enjoyed it as well, and that all my hard work paid off. So drop a like too, but definitely let me know if this type of content is good for you all out there. Or not. That's okay too. It helps me figure out the direction that I need to go in when I'm creating these videos. So please, feedback is super valuable to me, and I'd love yours. Good, bad, indifferent, terrible, wonderful, all the buzzwords, whatever. It all helps keep this thing going and growing. And that's it. Finally, yes, it's over. That's all I got for you. Thank you again for checking out this Dune deep dive. And with that, it's been fun. But I'm out, y'all. Mars signing off. Peace.